Today's video is going to take a look at region. We recently looked at the idea of, or the concept of place as being something that has the unique characteristics of a specific place on the Earth's surface. When we look at regions, we're looking at a unique area, so looking for some commonly shared characteristics that make a particular area in the Earth's surface unique. In other words, giving a region or a place a shared sense of place based on common characteristics. In order to really talk about regions and to have an understanding of these concepts, you should be very familiar with the concepts of cultural landscape and the types of regions, functional, formal, and vernacular. You'll also hear, as we go through these, a couple alternative ways that these are often referenced, and you should be familiar with those too. Regions themselves, as I mentioned, sense of place can be applied to larger places or larger areas on Earth rather than just one specific point. However, when we start talking about regions, multiple places, it's unlikely that they're going to be completely alike. However, there's going to be some commonalities, whether it's economic or social or cultural, or in terms of the physical landscape, the natural landscape that occurs in a particular area. But usually there's going to be some combination of these characteristics that are shared, that are going to help define it into a specific region or classified as a region. That doesn't mean they're all the same, but generally speaking, the majority. When we look at the different regions of the world, we can see the North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. And then within that, you can see different locational regions, taking a look at, for example, East Asia, or looking at Asia and having Central Asia, East Asia, Southwest Asia, Southeast Asia, and representing very distinct cultural regions and characteristics, whether it's religion or language, climate, types of economic systems, etc. But we can also change the scale and look at it in a more local way as well. What we might see when we go to a specific place or on a much smaller scale or larger scale, I'm sorry, is that we're going to see we're going to see some specific characteristics that may be more apparent than on a global scale, and we're going to see those specific things in different ways. In formal regions, what you might find are going to be a characteristic that is a unifying or generally speaking a uniform or homogeneous characteristic, one that is shared by all. A functional region is going to be nodal. In other words, that's a point or a center that that something is held in common, and its influence diminishes with distance or as it diffuses away from the particular node that we're looking at. So it's a functional or nodal region. And then the vernacular is also referenced as the perceptual region. And this is where there isn't a defined area, and it's more of a combination of characteristics that sort of establish themselves as being a specific type regional characteristic. And we'll go through a couple examples here right now. Formal regions, otherwise known as uniform or homogeneous regions. They're usually not actually homogeneous. There's usually some minority, and you should be careful about making absolute references in terms of homogeneous or all statements. But usually it is a very common characteristic. If we were to look at different places in the world where world religions are prevalent, in the Middle East, for example, Islam is very prevalent in the region. It's often associated with that particular region. If we look at the Midwest, it's often associated with the Lutheran Church in the Protestant faith. So when we look at various places, we can look at some of these distinct characteristics where languages are spoken even, or different industries. It can also be symbolic of political boundaries. So, as we look at a couple examples, the Corn Belt. Now, there's no official boundary of the Corn Belt, but there's climate conditions in which corn grows, and it's pretty clear where that is based on the map you see below. thus being referred to as the Corn Belt because it's the most productive area in the United States where we grow corn. We can also look at voting boundary areas that are formal regions that historically vote more Democratic or Republican. And you can classify those as formal regions in terms of voting patterns, in terms of political ideologies. We could look at even political boundaries as a way of looking at formal regions, even state boundaries. Functional regions are going to be what we call those nodal regions, and they're organized around a specific focal point that usually resides around some sort of information or network that is reliant on that connectedness. And when you go further away from that node, you're going to see a diminished influence or strength of that association. So as we look at another example of this, one example would be looking at Rapid City, South Dakota. It's in the southwest corner of the state, but it's on a convergence of some of the major interstates of I-90 and some of the state freeways. And you see this as a economic sort of hub of the region. And you see as you move away, it's less and less significant, but for that hub, it transcends state borders and influences that local region as a place of an airport, convergence of those interstate freeways. Another example would be in Iowa, looking at affiliations of NBC. So local affiliations of the NBC television station, you can see that are going to, near different cities, are going to find themselves watching those local affiliations. So there's a functional region. If you move beyond that, you won't be watching that particular local affiliate. Vernacular, or the perceptual regions, are going to be ones that are part of a cultural identity. So they're even less likely to be defined by even a broadcast signal, or a convergence of transportation networks. But this is going to be more rooted in the people's the traditions and culture of the local area, and it's not as scientifically defined or able to be defined. But we can look at some of these characteristics in vernacular regions, and there's a couple examples of what is a very common way of saying the sense of this place. As we look at examples, we could talk about the United States, and look at where we would describe the Midwest or the West or the South, all characteristics, New England, that share common characteristics of the particular area that might be different depending on where you are in the United States. But by definition, we could look at these different characteristics, that it's a high producing cotton area, or that there's over 50% Baptist, or that we have low education statistics, or the types of climate characteristics. But the collective product or sort of overlay of these characteristics help define that perceptual or vernacular region of the South. So, looking at what you've just watched, you should be very familiar with, or be able to answer the questions. What are regions? What purpose do geographers try to create regions or define them? And what are the three types of regions? If you can't answer those questions right now, you should go back and review the video and come to class prepared with questions that you might have as a result.